First of all, I'd have to thank the producers and for including me for one thing, but for really getting a message out about the health effects of nutrition. That movie has had much more of an effect than probably anything that I've been involved with. And I've been in what I thought were some really wonderful projects. Eating You Alive was spectacularly done from a scientific point of view. The social sort of economic aspects of What the Health, as another movie, was spectacular. But this one really, I guess because of the people who were involved and the professionalism and the sort of the dramatic effects of the science and the performance aspects of it, really made this very special. So it was great for me to even have a part in it at all and try to explain to people which real captive audience and explain to them the cardiac effects of eating animal products and how we can do so much better and get heart disease to not be the #1 killer, particularly in the United States and in Australia. I always joke that, as a chief of cardiology, our income is dependent on heart disease occurring. And so, I'm sort of talking against my own, division's self-interest when we try to do prevention. But I think there's been enough of a recognition of the epidemic of heart disease that we could spend our lifetime trying to fix on this. If we don't really get to the root of the problem, we're never going to have to worry about the money, because there's always more people who have heart disease and we just can't get to them fast enough. So having media outlets, having you guys do videos and get the word out about plant-based nutrition, and exercise and weight control and paying attention to risk factors, if we could wrap that up into human health, just like we learn in school how to read and write, that really would do us a lot of good. I would say that it's particularly a problem with some of the advanced countries that still have heart disease as #1, such as the United States. It's true that low and middle income countries, it has crept up to #1. No longer infectious disease and that sort of thing. Those things have been handled. So heart disease being #1 when there's so much better that we could do, we really need to focus on that. If we look at it, it's a good question, and I get it all the time, and it's really important because everybody will have their own motivation. And I could have, if I had known more about it, if there was more data available back, in the 20 years ago, I would have done it because I had a borderline blood pressure as an African American, even though I was, athletic and everything, and eating what was considered a very healthy diet, American Heart Association diet, chicken, fish, no skin, not fried. It turns out that wasn't healthy for me because those items actually have a fair amount of cholesterol, and I was one of the many people who were sensitive to absorption of cholesterol. And so as I got a little older, it turns out my LDL cholesterol went up to 170. That was actually very high, and in Australian terms, that would be about 5 millimoles. That's really I wasn't going to last very long with that. It turns out that the month that I found that out, and I went completely plant-based that day, completely vegetarian diet, no animal products anymore. And I had a lot of support from the Journal of the American Medical Association, because that week they actually had a publication from Canada, David Jenkins, the Portfolio Diet, talking about nuts, plant sterols, soy protein, and fiber as a way of lowering cholesterol, and saying that it was actually equivalent to a low dose of the statins that we had grown to know and love in the United States, because the statins had saved so many lives and so many heart attacks and strokes, but not despite the patients really not improving their lifestyle. So it was improving things, but not curing. So to be able to equal a drug, that really caught my attention. Now we know that we can do better. We can actually focus on diet and exercise and get everyone's risk factors in order, and really prevent the heart disease and strokes, peripheral artery disease, erectile dysfunction. All of it can be improved, reversed, if we focus on these risk factors. Well, I'm sort of sorry to say, and this is not going to surprise anyone who's watching this, is that there's sort of 2 major wars going on right now as we're sitting here. One is the sort of promotion of ketogenic diets or low-carb diets. And the reason that they've caught the attention of people is that we do live in an epidemic of obesity. And that is a very effective diet at lowering obesity. When you can get rid of some of the abdominal obesity, you will improve your insulin resistance. So the people with metabolic syndrome or tendency to diabetes or pre-diabetes, they can actually get better. The problem, which has been codified by so many people at this point, is that it does have its poor health effects on the heart. And the National Lipid Association of the United States had one of the most insightful publications. Anyone who's interested in the low-carb diet, please look at that. Carol Kirkpatrick was the first author. Really took a look at everything, not just the diabetes, which does improve, but looked at all of the risk factors and saw that inflammation goes up, that you actually end up with more cholesterol. And that's why people, if they do this for any length of time, you can get heart attacks. And that's actually been shown multiple times, the increase in cardiac death, particularly if you're a heart attack survivor. It's a particularly tough diet to try and have your heart survive, even though the diabetes might and your weight might get better. So that's a real struggle. And so I think one of the things that we should be doing is do head-to-head competition that's long enough to see the ill effects if people really want to do that diet versus the beneficial effects of plant-based diet. Because doing it only with risk factors is only going to capture a certain number of people, and they're going to always, look askance at retrospective research that says that the low-carb diet is really bad for you. They'll say, well, these studies are not prospective, they're not randomized. It's really just a matter of observational studies that have flaws in them. The only way to get around that is direct head-to-head. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is, believe it or not, in the United States, there's a big war going on between the plant-based diets. And they're all friends of mine, and I'd sort of tease them as this is going on, and sometimes it has even gotten personal. And I was trying to tell them that, why you're arguing is because you're all successful. And why are you all successful? Because there's no animals in your diets. And so people talking about, adding some omega-3s or alpha-linoleic acid, or making sure that you don't have nuts or you don't use olive oil versus, yes, some small amounts of extra virgin olive oil will improve your function, but if you do too much, then or if it's not extra virgin, it'll actually ruin your blood vessel function. And they're going back and forth at each other. And, I understand that, there are some very strongly held opinions in this area, but biochemical bases and some physiologic bases for these strong held opinions. But how about doing head-to-head competition? Yeah, we probably need to do the low-carb one first, okay? But at some point, and rather than just arguing back and forth, let's do some prospective, even if they're small, even if they're short term, do some prospective trials. I think what they're going to find is that there's uniform success, and you could have your different color of diet and your different, if it's plant-based, whole food plant-based, they're all going to win. And they may end up in a tie, or one may be a little better than the other, but they're all going to be so much better than A, warring with each other, and B, ignoring the fact that, like I tried to tell them, we have bigger fish to fry without the fish and without the frying. It's one of the saddest aspects of the American healthcare system is that the number of, particularly in cardiology, the number of cardiologists who feel that they've got enough nutrition information to advise knowledgeably their patients was, in our survey, about 1% of our practicing cardiologists and 0% of our trainees. And every once in a while, you'll see an initiative by someone who says, we've really got to change the medical school curriculum, or we've got to take continuing education, continuing medical education, and put nutrition in as one of the codicils for getting your licensing done. And they're usually turned down. There have been a handful of medical schools who are adopting it, so I have hope for the future, and hopefully that will become the standard by which everyone is judged. But right now, what I'm suffering with, so to speak, is, I guess you could look at it as a practice opportunity. And so I'm getting referrals from local universities next to Rush, or across or down the street, where the cardiologist has told the patient after their heart attack that nutrition doesn't matter so much. And it's difficult because I was part of the primary prevention guidelines, and the principles that we have in there do apply to secondary prevention, and some of them even more so when you look at the Lyon Heart Study, which was secondary prevention, was actually better than the Predimed trial for primary prevention in terms of having a dietary impact. So diet does matter. And what really saddens me is when I hear a patient say that their cardiologist said that take these medications, which are important, but that diet doesn't matter so much. That means that they are going to be susceptible, and they are not advising their families and the rest of their patients. And so I do this very unusual thing of giving the patient all the tools, giving them all the information, and ask them if they would please either go through their portal or go back to their cardiologist and share with them what I've shared with the patient to try to get them on board. Tell them to call me. They'll get my referral note if the patient will allow it. But I really want to educate the cardiologist, and doing this as a handful of plant-based cardiologists in the country isn't going to work. We have to have larger scale operations. So we're doing it. We're doing it with our American College of Cardiology Nutrition Group. We've had a large number of publications over the last 4 years since sort of helped spur that as president of the American College of Cardiology. They were very nice to me to let me sort of buttress that group up with a lot of people. And sure, there's some conflicting opinions in there, but those are wonderful conversations to have. And we're getting the word out about nutrition and nutrition controversy. So I encourage anyone who's interested to look up the Journal of American College of Cardiology Nutrition Controversies series and just read through, and you have a good dialogue with your cardiologist and get them that information. And hopefully the cardiologist will no longer have heart disease as the #1 killer of cardiologists. That makes no sense. Well, I think there is hopefully more attention paid to prevention than there was a few years ago. The fact that we had in 2019 a major guideline by the two large cardiac societies, the American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association, come out and talk specifically about primary prevention. We've been, as everyone likes to say, and me too, we've been mopping up the floor for 40 years now, and coming up with wonderful devices and medications to improve the outcomes after somebody's had an event. But at some point we have to turn off the faucet instead of just mopping up the floor. And so, having more of a focus on primary prevention, have that the principles of trying to manage and improve or get rid of diabetes, control high blood pressure, high cholesterol, get people, no one should be smoking, measure your risk factors and measure your risk. Don't take aspirin if you're at low risk, because that actually is more harmful. And that was a big change for us for primary prevention. And having a set of nutrition guidelines, and the nutrition guidelines, having worked really hard on that portion of the guidelines, it's not exactly where we would like it to be, because the randomized trials, the large randomized trials, are still lacking, as we were mentioning before. But at some point, we do have enough data to say, with a sort of a class 2 recommendation, that we ought to be lowering cholesterol, sodium, saturated fat, and sugar, including sugar-sweetened beverages, and we should be avoiding completely trans fats. And so I'm happy to say that consistent with that, the United States became the 4th major country, along with Denmark, Switzerland, and Canada, to ban trans fats in restaurants and the like. And so that's an improvement. So I think, we're starting to have some movement. If I could pick out one other thing, it would be the fact that the number of people who are plant-based, here for the Australian Open, and Novak Djokovic is playing tonight. I'm hoping my flight will get me back there for that match. and coming out as completely plant-based. And the more we hear about plant-based athletes who are really improving their athletic performance and their recovery, as well as their subsequent risk of heart disease, I wish that would go viral, essentially, because we see so many. I don't follow it enough to say the rugby and the AFL and cricketers, but in the United States, the number of American football players, baseball players, and basketball players who die in their early 50s is just so high, and it has to do with the training table. And so I'm hoping that this nutrition thing in the athletic population, with all these high-priced and really revered athletes, they become role models. And I remember, years ago they were saying, "Well, we're not a role model." Yeah, you are. And so the things that you do are going to be emulated by young kids, and those are the lifestyles that they're going to develop. And so having the athletes come out as plant-based is really going to help. Well, organizations, I don't know that there are organizations like Doctor for Nutrition. There aren't enough of them. The leadership is very insightful, very dynamic. The only problem I have with them is that it's hard to tell them no. So if they want something, I try to do it because I share the mission the organization and the ability to get things done has been really, I think, helpful to so many people. And I'm hoping to continue to work with them because they are really getting the word out and they're saving lives. And the funny part about this business, when you're doing primary prevention and improving people's lifestyle, you may not see the result. Yeah, you'll see the weight go down. You'll see them climbing mountains instead of sitting in a chair. You'll see some tangible efforts, but you may not see what happens 40 years from now. And that's when the benefits of everything they're going to do are really going to come to fruition. So I'm really congratulate the leadership on developing such a robust organization and hoping that there'll be a continued success and more broadening. It needs to be more international. They need to come to the United States and a lot of places. There are a lot of places, particularly third world countries, as put out by the PURE trial, where there may be plant-based nutrition going on, but they're bad plants. That is, you've refined carbohydrates, white rice, white flour, a lot of sugar, that sort of thing, and you can get the impression that having a meat-based diet would actually be better. Well, the Doctors for Nutrition really focus on just not plant-based nutrition, but whole food plant-based nutrition, which is so much healthier. And so there's pockets. So we think of westernized world as eating all this bad stuff, but there are a lot of other countries, poorer countries, where heart disease is now number one. Again, because of nutrition. It's a different style, a different problem, but it's still something that can be improved with whole food plant-based nutrition. So good on them, and I'm happy to work with them.